Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live stream. I'm Savannah Levins with WCNC Charlotte, joined by Arthur Bartlett with the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy. Today, we are talking about tax season. We ran a story last night at 11 p.m., kind of going over a few things that people need to know that might be a little bit different this year. And we did a live stream last night as well. We got a lot of questions. So we're back here. And I'm joined with an expert, thankfully. So Arthur, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me on again.
So just to let everyone know who is tuning in right now, we've already got 225 people watching. If you guys have questions for myself or Arthur, we're going to try our best to answer them. Tax-related questions, anything you have that you want to know more about going into tax season, write them in the comments. We'll be able to pull them up and answer them. Arthur, while we're waiting for some of these comments and questions, I'll just start by asking you, a lot of people filed for unemployment for the first time ever this past year. For those folks, what do they need to know about filing their taxes?
Right. So they should be aware of the fact that the unemployment insurance benefits that they received in 2020, those dollars are taxable income. So they need to be included on their tax return. Now, if the money was received from the state of North Carolina, they'll receive a statement from the state of North Carolina indicating how much money they received in unemployment insurance benefits. So they need to make sure to take that statement to their tax preparer, or if they're doing their taxes themselves, to include that information on their tax return. Otherwise, they risk getting audited by the IRS or the state of North Carolina for failing to have disclosed all the income they earned in 2020. Now, a lot of people may have chosen to voluntarily withhold taxes from those benefit payments that they were getting, the unemployment insurance benefits, but a lot of people didn't, simply because they didn't realize the need to do that, or they really needed all of the money they were getting in those checks. So it's really important to be aware of that and think about that as you're doing your tax returns this season, either yourself or a paid tax preparer.
And it's federal and state taxes, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And another question we were getting a lot last night is, the extra $600 that people were getting under the CARES Act, I believe was what that was passed under. They want to know if that was included or is included in your income and is also taxable.
Right. So the first and second stimulus payments will not be included in your income on your 2020 tax return. But the 2020 tax return does provide a mechanism for people to claim any stimulus payments that they may have missed but are entitled to. They would claim them in the form of a recovery rebate credit. So it's important for people to, when they do their 2020 taxes, to do that reconciliation on the 2020 return to make sure that they're getting all of the stimulus payments that they're entitled to.
And I want to pull up one question we just got from Teresa. Teresa says, I'm on disability and receive money every month. I did get 2 checks, one last year for the $1,200 and then the $600, I think this year. Do I still need to pay taxes on disability as my only income?
Well, if she's talking about disability payments from the federal government and the state government from a governmental entity, then the answer should be no. So the answer should be that if those are governmental benefit payments that she's receiving on account of her disability, no. If the disability payments are through an insurance program, so she's receiving either long-term or short-term disability payments because she through a prior employer, the issue is a little bit different. But if they're government disability payments, she should not owe tax on that income unless she had some other income. But again, her situation is particular to her. But if that's her only income, the answer should be no, if it's a government disability check she's getting.
Yeah. And let's talk about the timeline. Vanessa says, I want to know why people who filed after me already got their refunds and I'm still pending. A lot of people earlier in the comments were saying they're unable to check their status. They want to know when they're going to get their refunds. I believe the IRS said the estimate's about 20 days. But that's if you file online. You mentioned earlier doing it over the mail. Yeah.
Oh, right. So a lot of people prepared their tax returns and put them in the queue for an electronic filing that opened up on February 12th. So the IRS just opened up electronic filing and just started actually taking tax returns. So there were people who put into the queue returns that ended up being filed on February the 12th. Now the IRS is working through all those electronic returns as diligently as they can. And I really can't explain why somebody, well, there could be a number of reasons why somebody has to wait longer for a refund than another taxpayer. It could be because they're claiming refundable credits on the return. And so it's going to take longer for them to get the refund if they're claiming refundable credits like the additional child tax credit, the earned income tax credit. So it may take longer to get the refund. And it will certainly take longer for them to get their refund if they mail in their tax return. If you mail in your tax return because of some difficulty you had filing electronically, it could take a considerable amount of time to get your return prepared, your return processed, and to get your refund. Not just weeks, but maybe even a little bit longer, maybe more than a month, certainly, because the IRS is having staffing issues because of COVID. So it's going to take them longer to process a paper return.
Well, we're getting the comments coming in now. I want to try to get to them as quickly as we can. One or two, I think I saw said they're wondering if you can still get the stimulus check if you haven't filed taxes in a few years. I think I saw someone else say they don't have income, they're retired. Is that going to impact future stimulus checks if they don't file? Do you know anything about that? I believe the IRS has people's information and just does the deposits, but what do you know about that?
Right. So if somebody hasn't filed in a number of years because they didn't have a filing requirement, or even if they did, the 2020 tax return provides a place for them to claim any stimulus payments that they missed. So if they missed the first stimulus payment or the second stimulus payment that the IRS has just finished paying out from January of this year through, I think last week they stopped sending out those second round of stimulus payments. If they've missed either their first or second stimulus payment, they can try to capture those stimulus payments by filing a 2020 tax return, whether they had a filing requirement in prior years or not. So, or for 2020 or not. So there could be people who are simply filing a 2020 tax return to try to capture stimulus payments that they missed out on but are entitled to.
So people who don't normally file might be in their best interests to file if they want to claim those payments? Absolutely. So if somebody thinks they're entitled to a stimulus payment from last year and for some reason did not get it, they should file a 2020 tax return, even if they're not required to file, because there's a mechanism on the 2020 return to capture any missed stimulus payments that somebody should have gotten. Yeah. And speaking of that, I'll pull up Margie's comment, and I've seen a lot like this saying they never received their stimulus payment. I assume these are people who are used to filing, but still never received their checks. Obviously, what they want to do is apply for the recovery rebate credit. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
Yeah, right. So the recovery rebate credit is essentially the stimulus payments by another name. So the stimulus payments were in advance credit. They were paid out in advance of the filing of the 2020 tax return. So if somebody, for some reason, again, didn't get the first or second stimulus payment, this recovery rebate credit is a mechanism for them to capture those missed stimulus payments by filing a 2020 tax return. And what the IRS does is on that 2020 return, either you or your tax preparer are going to indicate, oh, I received all of the first stimulus payment or some of it or none of it. And same thing with the second stimulus payment. I received all of it, some of it, or none of it. And this reconciliation occurs on the return. And then on the return, you indicate to the IRS how much you think you're owed. And that amount should be refunded to you unless there's some issue or disagreement between you and the service about how much you are entitled to.
Mm-hmm. And that applies obviously to people who didn't get a check because of, whatever reason, some fault with the IRS. But does it also apply to people who didn't qualify for a check before, like maybe people who made too much but don't in 2020, adult dependents, etc.?
Correct. So there are people who would not have qualified to get a stimulus payment in 2020, and either the first one or the second one, because of maybe their 2019 income was too high, or they were claimed as a dependent on somebody else's 2019 return. when we're looking at the 2020 return and claiming those missed stimulus payments as recovery rebate credits, we're looking to 2020 data. So it could be that somebody who had in 2020 for 2019 was claimed as somebody else's dependent. So an adult, perhaps an adult parent, may have been claimed on somebody's 2019 return as a dependent, but then for 2020 they're not going to be claimed. They can, on their 2020 tax return, go back and get a recovery rebate credit for themselves. So it's could be the case where that person's child who was taking care of them got a stimulus payment related to that parent because the IRS was looking at 2019 information, but the parent this year could file their own return for 2020 and also get a credit related to themselves looking back at the 2020 data. This could be true for a college student too. It could be true for somebody whose income was higher in 2019 and didn't qualify, but when we look to their 2020 income information, they do qualify for a recovery rebate credit. So the long and short of it is, it's important to, when you do your own tax return, to put in all the information, and the return process should tell you whether or not you're entitled to some of these recovery rebate credits or not. And if you're going to a paid preparer, tell them exactly what your situation is, give them lots of information about what happened in 2020, whether you got those stimulus payments or not, why you may not have gotten them in 2020, so that on this 2020 tax return here in early 2021, that tax preparer knows, okay, I need to be really careful when I'm looking at whether or not they're entitled to a recovery rebate credit, because that taxpayer very well may be entitled to some or all of that first or second stimulus payment.
It seems like it would also be a smart idea. I'm thinking of, like, we did a story about college students who, are financially independent but didn't get a stimulus check, to file their own taxes this year, especially with that $1,400 check, that obviously is kind of, hasn't fully been passed yet, but the expectation is it could come in like March. For that check, a lot of people were saying, well, should I do anything differently now? What would you recommend? I mean, is it pretty much just?
Well, we can speculate that the service, we can speculate that Congress, if that $1,400 stimulus payment is passed or enacted, the bill is passed and President Biden signs it into law, we can speculate that the service will probably be asked to look at 2020 tax filing information in order to push out those $1,400 payments. So yes, the situation that you described, where you had a college student who in 2020, they were responsible for, primarily responsible for their upkeep and care, the payments that they were making towards their housing and other things, and filed their own 2020 return. We can think that, it's very likely that the service will look to that 2020 return to figure out who to push the payment out to, and that college student would get one. But it's a little bit speculative at this point, but I do think that the IRS is going to look to the 2020 return when they're thinking about who's going to get that $1,400 stimulus payment.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to file that return. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And quickly want to address Margie's question. Any agencies providing free tax preparation? Obviously, are there with the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy? Can you quickly talk about what you guys do?
Right. So I am the program director for our low-income taxpayer clinic. So we deal primarily with situations where people, for some reason, have come to the attention of the IRS or the North Carolina Department of Revenue through their fault but through no fault of their own. There are any number of situations why you can end up in an audit where the IRS is saying, hey, what did you put on your tax return? Or you owe us a tax return, or you owe us money. So we help people deal with those situations. For 2020 tax preparation, traditionally we've referred people to volunteer income tax assistance sites. So these are sites where people could go and get their tax returns done for free. People of middle to low income could go and get their tax returns done for free, or we sent them to the IRS free file, which is on the irs.gov site. Because of COVID, there is limited availability for tax preparation services at these VITA sites or these volunteer sites. And again, the attraction of those is you don't have to pay to get the tax return prepared. The volunteers will prepare it for free. So therefore, you're saving maybe maybe $300 on the tax preparation fees that you might normally pay. Community Link is the local and non-for-profit that has run that program for a number of years. The information on their website and the information that we have right now indicates that they will run a VITA program, a free tax preparation program here in 2021. They still haven't put up information about how they're going to do it. They say that they will offer virtual appointments for people to sign up to get their taxes done. So if people are interested in taking advantage of these free sites, I encourage them to check on the Community Link website, or you could look on our Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy website, because we're going to be posting updates about when that VITA program goes live and providing a link to that site so that people can sign up for appointments.
Great. And I mean, I'll add, if your tax situation is pretty straightforward, to answer that viewer's question, I mean, there are things like I use the TurboTax free version. Mine are pretty cut and clear, and those websites have become so advanced and user friendly. Want to answer? Yeah.
I will. Let me mention real quick. Absolutely. So if you buy a TurboTax or H&R Block tax preparation software, they have very simple guided questions that push you through the program, and then there's a step where you review. The key is to enter all the information you have and not to rush to file before you know you have all of your W-2s and all of your other tax information. So don't do that. You could get yourself into trouble. Make sure that you have all of your W-2s and all your other tax information before you file, whether it's using a software product like TurboTax or something from H&R Block, whether it's using the IRS free file, which is available on the IRS website, irs.gov. You can do your taxes online for free if they're simple tax returns, or taking your information to a paid preparer or to one of these VITA locations where volunteers can do it. You must get all your information, because otherwise you may have to amend your return.
Yeah, very good point. That sounds like it would be a nightmare right now. I want to bring up Gwendolyn's question. We're getting so many questions, I'm trying to keep up. But Gwendolyn earlier commented, I worked from home this year. Can I, there she says, I work from home. Can I claim office space? A lot of people asking about that. Well,
there is the opportunity because of COVID to attempt to, see if claiming office space would make a difference for you, the home office deduction. The rules are very specific, but again, if you buy one of these guided tax preparation software programs like from TurboTax and H&R Block, they're going to ask you all of the necessary questions to see if you qualify for that home office deduction. So my recommendation is, if you use one of those products, answer all those questions accurately, because they ask you if you have a dedicated space, if so, how big it is, how long you used it, those sorts of things. And they ask you some more questions as well. And if you're going to a paid preparer, make sure that you answer all the questions they may ask you to see whether that'll make a difference on your tax returns as accurately as you can. Where you run afoul is where you claim a space that you shouldn't because it wasn't used primarily as your office, or and if the deduction is outsized to the income, it can raise a red flag with the IRS. So just be as accurate as you can as you work through those questions if you're doing it yourself, and as accurate as you can when you're answering questions from a paid tax preparer, if that's the route you choose to go. But by all means, attempt to claim it if you can.
Yeah. A lot of people are saying, and Mew Ash just commented again. Mew, I know you were asking before.
Yes.
I'm trying to get to your question. He says, my return was accepted, but I can't access my information on the IRS website. A lot of people were saying that they can't check their status. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, well, I expect it's because we're very close to the opening of tax season. I know it was on February 12th. Today is the 18th. I'm sure it's just a simple matter of the IRS catching up with all of the electronically filed tax returns that rushed in. So what happened this year is the IRS delayed the start of tax season. So there were lots of tax returns that were queuing up for that moment when the IRS began to accept those electronically prepared returns. And so now I think it's just an issue with the IRS catching up with that initial rush of electronically filed returns. I don't know that for sure, but I do know they're short-staffed. They should catch up in, I would think, the next few business days with returns that have been obviously accepted by them to be able to give you information. So I know that there are just inordinate demands on the IRS's system. So I'm unfortunately not surprised that when this person goes to the IRS website, they can't get current information about the status of their return. I would say just keep checking back every couple of days.
Yeah. And Charlie says, we talked about this in the beginning, but Charlie asks, when can people expect their refund for direct deposit? I think, I saw from the IRS, they were expecting or averaging about 21 days as the estimate. Have you heard anything differently?
I think that's very likely accurate, but again, it could be a little bit longer if somebody has some of those refundable credits they're claiming, which is unfortunate. You know, the earned income tax credit and the additional child tax credit, these are credits that are intended to help people who are down the income scale, and having those refunds pushed out a little bit later is probably what's going to happen, but it's just how the IRS processes the returns.
And some people like Kate, and she says she hasn't received her 2019 refund. I saw a couple comments like that. I imagine that's something that's kind of a case-by-case basis, but is this like a common issue that you've seen as well?
Yes. So if somebody has filed my first question would be, did she file it a paper return or did she file it electronically? If she filed a paper return, I think we talked last time, I have tax returns that I filed, 2019 tax returns that I filed for clients in mid to early 2020 that have still not been processed. Not processed because of the staffing issues we talked about at the IRS. So they have huge parts of their large campuses where they do their work that have had substantial percentage of their staff out of the office because of COVID and the fear of transmission of COVID in those very big office buildings with long rows of cubicles. So we have tax returns that we filed, again, in early 2020 that have still not processed, and the IRS can't give us any information about them because they simply haven't opened the envelopes that they're in. They have trucks of 18-wheeler trucks outside some of their facilities stacked with mail. So my first question to her would be, did you file it on paper? If the answer is yes, then I'm not surprised it may not have been opened and processed yet. If it was filed electronically and there was something else going on, I encourage her to give us a call because we may be able to help her with her 2019 refund information. And our phone number, our direct tax clinic phone number is 980-202-7329. And that number is really for people who have a tax controversy. So not an issue with 2020 necessarily, but an issue with some prior year, so 2019, 18, and earlier.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're getting all the 2020 questions in now. And Kate did comment. Yeah, Kate did comment saying she filed via paper. So you seem to have answered that question.
Kate, I'm very sorry. Yes, it's very frustrating.
Yeah. And someone else, Carrie, commented an interesting question I haven't seen. She said, do we expect them to delay further if a stimulus gets approved, or are those handled by different groups?
Delay the filing of the 2020 tax return?
I imagine she means, like is the return more likely to be more delayed if a new stimulus?
Oh, the refund. The refund.
Yeah, refund.
I don't know. Again, it's a question of resources, number of people in these buildings. They're extremely taxed. They've done, it's frustrating because the cases that we work, we need these back tax returns processed, but I'm amazed at the work that they've been able to do and to be able to get these checks out to taxpayers. So many people have gotten them. It's unfortunate that some people haven't. But these benefits have really been life-sustaining for a lot of people, the first stimulus payment and the second one. So they've done incredible work under a really difficult situation where, for the past 5, 6, 7 years, the IRS budget has been deliberately shrunk, but the obligations on those workers have increased. So they're doing the best they can. It's frustrating that they can't get back in the building and open the mail. But the question you asked, I don't think so. I really don't think it will, because one of the easier things for them to do, the IRS, is to push out payments like the stimulus payment. So the refund will come when it is due to be paid out, and after the return is validated the way it needs to be through the IRS's processing. But I don't think the stimulus payments, if let's say I've heard discussion that the bill will probably likely pass both chambers sometime in early March, be signed by the middle of March. So I would think that the IRS may start paying those stimulus payments out by the end of March or early April. And I don't think that doing two things will delay that from happening, or delay the refunds any further than they're already going to be delayed.
Mm-hmm. And a couple of people are asking again for you to repeat that number that you said earlier. Could you repeat that for us?
Sure. And again, this is for if you have an issue with a prior year, so 2019 or earlier. The number is 980-202-7329.
Thank you. And speaking of being paid out, I think if I keep you much longer, I'm going to have to put you on payroll. So any parting words and any remaining advice, anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to add?
I would just say to all the people who filed electronically already, just realize that the service is doing the best job they can. Keep checking back on the IRS website, and eventually they should get that information about your tax return updated. If it pushes on a couple of weeks, there still isn't information for you, try to contact the tax preparer you used or the helpline with the tax software that you use to prepare the return, and see if there's any information they can give you to try to get some answers about what's going on with your return. But just be patient. The service is working as hard as they can. And if you have an issue with a prior year, so 2019 or earlier, feel free to give my clinic a call, and we might be able to at least guide you in the right direction or provide direct assistance. The last thing is, don't forget that these VITA sites will be out there. This is through Community Link. We'll have a button on our website, Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, where you could sign up for an update. And just as soon as those volunteer tax assistance sites are open, it will push out a news alert to you that you can sign up for an appointment through Community Link to have your tax return prepared for free. Again, if you're moderate to low income.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was just looking at my notes. I have one more question before I release these. A lot of people were asking about 401k, if they had to dip into retirement, what that might mean for them.
Yeah, so if people had to dip into a 401k or a retirement plan vehicle in 2020 in order to pay bills and those sorts of things, so long as the distribution you took from the plan or the retirement account was on account of COVID, then you can spread the recognition of the income or the distribution over 3 years. So you can take 1/3 into income on your 2020 return, another third into income on your 2021 return, and the last third into income on your 2022 return. And you can avoid the 10% penalty tax on early distributions if that distribution was taken before you turned age 59 and a half. So you get the benefit of being able to avoid that penalty if it would otherwise have had to have been paid, and spreading the income over that 3-year period. So if that is you, if you did have to take a distribution, make sure that when you're working through the tax preparation software, you take that into account, that you can spread it out, and the tax software will ask you the appropriate questions. So be very careful when you're entering in the data about the distribution, and make sure that when you go to the tax preparer that you let them know, hey, I took this distribution. You'll have the information statement with you, but I want to spread out the income, and make sure that they're not that tax return doesn't have that 10% penalty tax on it.
Well, this has been great information. I'm seeing lots of very appreciative comments. So thank you so much. And for those late joiners, when we end this stream, you'll be able to watch the whole thing back. We covered a ton. Arthur Bartlett with Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.